Okay, so I'm going to talk about mimic clipping a little bit. I think it's pretty powerful and a really useful skill to have, much more so than the other three tier. Like they have these tier three tricks. There's hovering, molder and bounce, mimic clip, dark aga. I think hovering and molder and bounce are much less powerful than mimic clip. Dark aga, when it's useful, it's really useful, but mimic clip in particular, because it just significantly opens up your options for when you can choose to go to pod. So it's really valuable. So you don't have a bow, right? The first thing, you need to kill the two green guys. The easiest way, just be a little bit cautious. Just get them with the pots. If you have a sword, great. If you have the hammer, great. Whatever. Just, you're fine. So the easiest way for me to do this isn't necessary, but it's the easiest. So remember, the red mimic will walk in the opposite direction as you do. So when I hold to the right, he walks left. When I hold to the left, he walks right. Get him against the left wall. I tap A twice to grab the wall. So now you can see now he's going to walk. If I hold left, he's going to walk to the right, but I'm not moving. Right? So, bufferless mimic clip. I'm going to show this. This doesn't work for everybody. It really depends, honestly, on your controller and kind of your fingernails, weirdly enough. But a lot of people treat it way more roughly than it needs to be. So all you're going to do is you're going to grab the controller, right? And we're going to brush your fingers from right to up. So here's the controller, right? I'm going to take my hand off the A button here for a sec. And we're going to brush our fingers here to here, just like whoop. So the easiest way is to rotate the controller. I'm going to grab the wall again, right? Make sure I can move our guy without me moving. So I'm holding the controller against my lap vertically. So in other words, it's oriented this way. So like L is facing away from my body. I'm using my right hand, and I'm just going to brush from the right direction, which is now facing me. Right is now facing me, and up is now facing to my right. And it doesn't require like a lot of pressure. It really doesn't. Like, if you're hitting it really hard, you're doing something wrong. And there he goes. So all you're doing, it's literally the motion is it's the like there's a really good Yagamoth video where he shows how he's doing it, but it's literally just like this. It's like that. So the reason why this works is that what happens is that you're trying to do basically you're trying to tap right for one frame and then tap up to cancel the mimic popping out of the wall, I think is basically what's happening. So, and you can see that opens the door, right? Once the mimic once he gets far enough into the wall, he floats off into the distance. So we're going to do this again. I'm going to kill these two guys. Bye. Get him against the wall, right? And now, again, it's like just brushing. Like, you can see I'm really not pushing hard. It's not, I don't want to say it's easy, but I think people overcomplicate it because they think it has to be harder than it is. But if you saw that, I wasn't putting a lot of pressure on the controller. I wasn't doing anything really complicated. It's literally just like holding A and then like it's then just doing this motion. And the idea there is I'm tapping right, which is the direction that faces my body, very briefly. The goal is you only want to be pushing that very briefly and then getting on to down. That's why we do that motion, that little brush motion. So one more time. So this works, you know, even if you don't have a weapon. Kill these two guys. You don't have to be holding the wall. It's just, I think it's easier to keep track of what you're doing and where you are. And then it's so... You can see him like slowly kind of like feeding into the wall there. And there he goes. Like, it's... Buffered mimic clips, which are the ones with pauses, to me are much, much, much harder. This is much simpler. And it just requires like... I legitimately think most people... Now, again, I want to be really clear. It's very controller dependent in my experience. If you have a controller that is kind of loose on the D-pad, this is much easier. So for example, I know people who play with like 8-bit DOs where the D-pad is higher. This is a Super Famicom controller, so the D-pad is lower. It is harder on an 8-bit DO, in my experience, to do this. It's not nearly as easy. I'm not saying it can't be done, but in my experience, it is less easy. But regardless, I think far too often people try to do these like really complicated, or they're trying to get like a ton of pressure, or go really fast, or whatever, hit a ton. You saw it was very light. Like if you want, like if you find it, there's like a video. It's on the Rando Discord somewhere, the main tournament Discord actually, of Yagamoth literally just doing like. And when he does it, it's like so obvious. He's like barely touching it. It's like this. He's doing like that. It like super light pressure, and the mimic just sails off into the distance. So, I am of the personal opinion that this is nowhere near as important as a lot of other stuff, but I actually would disagree a little bit with the tiering. In terms of putting mimic clip, like, I think you could make a pretty good argument that like mimic clip will have more cases where it is valuable than like learning how to get to Dark Cross. I guess that's with the Fire Rod. Oh no, without Fire Rod. Like learning how to get to Dark Cross without Fire Rod or Lamp, in other words, when it's not in logic, to me, that has a lot less value than something like this. Because the idea here is that this gives you the option to go to pod even without a bow. You won't be able to beat pod, but you can clear a lot more of it. Right? Like it is possible to be bow locked, where you can only get the first item in pod. The potion camera unlock solves that, but if you don't have a potion, being able to mimic clip allows you to get everything else in pod. And there will be times, like if pod is a pendant, for example, the option to go to pod earlier rather than later, you need to remember, it's very important to remember logically what you do and don't have in logic. But having that option available to you gives you a lot more choices. And it can also give you some very real important information about where your bow probably isn't, which can be just as valuable, right? If you go to pod and you find flippers right side, or if there's two keys over here and you find your flippers in the back where they're key locked, you know the flippers are behind a bow. So if I find that, I'm not looking for a bow in swamp or in ice. I'm looking somewhere else, even if it's a not great check, because I know that most likely, I mean, maybe maybe there's a second bow somewhere, but at least one bow has to be before the flippers, if depending on where you find stuff. So, point being, I think this can be worth knowing. It's not at all a requirement, but it's, in my opinion, a very useful trick. And every once in a while it becomes insanely valuable because you'll find like the second bow on pod right side, or You'll have a seed that doesn't require a bow except for the GT climb, and this strat works in Ganon's Tower as well. You can mimic clip GT, and if you mimic clip GT, you can beat GT without a bow. So, give it a try. I don't think it's crazy, but like I'll put it this way: I watched Yagamoth's video. This is now a couple years back, and I came into the Prac hack and gave it a try, and it was like it just worked. And I think again, it's controller dependent, so don't feel bad if you can't do it. But if you can, I'll bet it's not as hard as you think.